What's option 3?
Option 3 is the view that says consciousness, although irreducible, isn't exactly outside that physical causal network at all. Consciousness instead is deeply tied to the intrinsic nature of the physical world. And this goes back to, Immanuel Kant, if not further, and Bertrand Russell. We don't really know the intrinsic nature of entities out there in the physical world. The physical world is always revealed to us via its appearances, its effects on us. Take a bunch of physical particles. We understand their relationships to each other and the causal structure of this network out there. But do we really know what these particles are in themselves? As Kant said, do we know the nature of the thing in itself, the Ding an sich? Or as Russell said, we understand the extrinsic properties of physical entities, but not their intrinsic properties. So that's a big metaphysical mystery. What's the intrinsic nature of entities out there in the physical world? Combine this with another metaphysical mystery. We have these intrinsic properties of consciousness. How are we going to place them with respect to the physical world? Well, Russell's idea was maybe we can solve both these problems at once. Say, it turns out that the intrinsic properties of the physical world are either precisely the properties of consciousness or certain other special intrinsic properties which are very closely related to the properties of consciousness. So on this view, which I sometimes think of as the panpsychist view for consciousness everywhere, or the pan-protopsychist view for proto-consciousness everywhere, wherever you have fundamental physical entities in the world, like physical particles, they have an extrinsic nature and an intrinsic nature. That intrinsic nature might be closely tied to consciousness itself. So consciousness or proto-consciousness spread throughout the physical network. Now, if you take this view, there's no danger of consciousness being epiphenomenal, being outside the network. In some sense, consciousness is going to be present at the ground of all physical causation. It's going to be consciousness which in some sense is doing the work. When one particle hits another particle, that particle is somehow intrinsically constituted by consciousness or proto-consciousness. It's right in there, in the causal network. Likewise, when I perform an action, certain intrinsic properties in my brain are going to be tied to consciousness, and in some sense, that's really doing the work. So in this view, consciousness is right there in the causal network. Now, of course, this view is speculative. The other two views are both very speculative too. So I don't know which of these three views is correct, and I go back and forth myself a bit between them. I think each of them, though, has some chance of being correct. If you're really worried about finding a causal role for consciousness, I think you should go for the second and look to quantum mechanics, or go to the third and look to the intrinsic nature of the physical world. But these are very much, I think, open questions for exploration in the coming years. We haven't yet got to the bottom of them.